Hello guys, welcome back to another video on bite-sized GRE. So the thing I'm going to discuss today is actually a continuation of our previous video. In that one I discussed this passage here, which is actually a GRE argument essay question, and we came up with steps such as these 1 to 6 here by annotating the passage and planning the points that we are going to include in the essay. So if you haven't watched that video already, I recommend doing so because I explained how I got these points, and in the video today we are going to understand how to use these points to compose our main essay. So a quick recap, the argument essay is one of the two essays that you will have to write in the analytical writing section of the GRE. You will get 30 minutes to plan, write and check your essay. And today we are going to be focusing on the writing. Right, so let's get started. So the first thing that you need to do is write your introduction. Once you're done planning, you have to focus on writing your introduction. So I mentioned before that the planning phase should take no more than 5 to 8 minutes, and the rest of the time you should devote to composing your essay, and at the end, of course, you should leave some time for checking. So in the introduction, what I usually do is I take the main argument, the main, the point that's being made in the passage, I rephrase it and I include it in my introduction. So what do I basically mean by that? We'll understand by reading this essay. What the passage basically says is that the government should increase funding towards water sports like swimming, and then there are a few more mentioned, boating. And if they increase funding towards these water sports, then more people in the city, in Mason City, will take part. And they provided some, some reasoning behind why the government should increase funding. So this is basically me paraphrasing the main argument of the passage. And I'm just going to mark that in red because we discussed this. The next thing you need to do is go through the instructions in the question. So the main instructions here was that you have to examine the unstated assumptions of the argument, which we already noted, and finally you have to explain how the argument depends on the assumptions and what the implications are if the assumptions prove unwarranted. In simple words, you have to say that these assumptions, if they are false, then what problems will occur? Okay, so what problems will occur if the assumptions we found in the passage are false? Right, so I wrote all this down here in step 1. And if you think about it for a while, then if the assumptions in the passage, they turn out to be false, and the government, still spends money on water sports, then what problems can occur? The government will basically waste their budget money, and the river will still, the people will still not take part in water sports. So the river will still remain unused, for water sports. That's the main problem. So here you can see that if the assumptions are proven false, it could result in a huge financial loss for the government. This is the main implication, since they will be wasting valuable taxpayers' money. And I'm just gonna highlight that part in red too. Okay then, so step 1 was paraphrasing the prompt and also mention in your introduction the main answer to the question that you were given in the GRE instruction. This was the question in our passage. Right then, so I've finished that. Next, you have to order your body paragraphs. So I mentioned before in our previous video that every essay has to have an introduction, some body paragraphs, and a conclusion. So the points that we found during our planning stage, these 1 to 6 points, you are going to have to arrange them into, organized body paragraphs. And I did that here. For example, the first point that we had was the surveys that were mentioned in the argument, that the residents took part in surveys. And the problem we found, the unstated assumptions we found, was that The surveys were very vaguely mentioned. We don't know how many people took part, what percentage of the city took part, how many questions were in the survey. None of this was mentioned. And this point turned into my first paragraph here, my first body paragraph. So if you quickly read through this, you'll see that everything I've written here in note form is basically expanded here into this body paragraph. So this is the main part here. The passage does not mention how many people participated in the survey. For example, if the city constitutes of 10,000 residents and only 100 took part, then it's an unlikely scenario that, every resident ranked water sports high on their favorite activity list. So this was the main point in my body paragraph. You'll notice that I just wrote the point during planning, but when I composed my essay, I also included an example to go along with it. So examples, when they're, meaningful, they go a long way in explaining your main points. Right then, so after mentioning the surveys, I also mentioned this one, point 3. The assumption that the river was not used because the government gives very little of its budget to maintain facilities. Basically, the passage said that the river was not used for riverside sports like boating and fishing. And they failed to mention whether the river was currently used by something else. So, for example, if the river is not used for, swimming, it could be because the river is being used to generate electricity. This is an example that I included here, for example, here. So I'm going to mark that in red. Remember how I just said that examples can really elaborate your points? This is what I mean. This could be a devastatingly untrue assumption, since rivers can serve various essential purposes in a society, such as, generating electricity through hydroelectric dams. So you take your point that you planned, you put it in a body paragraph, and you add an example. It's as easy as that. And look what I did after, adding the example. I said that if the Mason River is already being used in another task, the government allocating funds could make no difference into whether the river is used for any sporting activities. I'm going to mark that in green. Look at our question again. We were asked to explain that if the assumptions were false, what were the implications? What could be the consequences if the assumptions, were false? So I'm just going to write consequences here. And in my answer, I mentioned that, if the river was used for something else, then a consequence could be that giving money to sporting activities could result in no difference at all. Okay, next. So this is my final body paragraph, and here I mentioned that the passage said that cleaning up the river could increase participation. For example, there have been complaints from residents about the quality of the river's water, and the state said that they would clean it up. Therefore, the river use for water sports is sure to increase. This is what the passage said. And our assumption was that even if, our unstated assumption was that even if the river is clean, people may not decide to participate in the sport. And this right here, this paragraph is the most important in this essay, because it's the biggest logic that we're going to be using to prove that the argument is weak. Remember that the purpose of any argument essay in the GRE is to prove that the passage, the reasoning in the passage given, is very, very weak. So what did I say in this paragraph? I stated that the passage, said that if the river was clean, then the river activity, sporting activity would increase. But the main problem was that they didn't mention anything relating to, people wanting to participate in the activities. Go back to the question. The surveys said that people, marked these activities, swimming, boating, and fishing, as their favorite. But the surveys mention nothing about the people wanting to take part in these activities. For example, here, Some residents mentioned that these activities, boating activities, were their favorite, but they mentioned nothing about the people wanting to, actually swim in the river. So what could basically happen is that the government could give funds, the river would become clean, and still, no person would turn up to, swim in the river or fish in the river. Maybe they just wanted to be surveyors. Maybe they wanted to cheer for people in a boating competition, but none of them were actually interested in boating themselves. Okay, so that was our main point. Oh, I also expanded it here, and I said that even if the river was clean, then it may not be free for, sporting activities. It could be used in something else, like a electric dam. The only thing that's left is a conclusion. In the conclusion, what you're going to do is basically you're going to restate the things that you mentioned above, and you are going to answer the main question given in this instruction, that the consequences if the assumptions that weren't mentioned in the passage were wrong, what consequences would have occurred. So I've written that here, that the argument has far too many holes and the argument is not strong. I said that basically. And even if the government, they gave funds to this venture, the river may still not be used for water sports. So that was basically my conclusion. The conclusion doesn't need to be big. Your main marks will be for your reasoning and the logic in your body paragraphs here. Okay then, so we finished analyzing this essay. Just a few more things that you need to know to increase your marks. Look at how I used transition words. For example, I said that I will begin. You could also use something like firstly here. Firstly is a good transition word. I also used things like next, so I'm going to highlight them. I used words like next. I used words like furthermore. I used words moreover. There was, I think there was some more that I used. To conclude. So what these words are called, the ones that I highlighted, they are called transition words and transition phrases. When you use them in your essay, the points that you've written, the transition between one paragraph to another, it sounds really good. The transition is really smooth. So it impresses the person who's reading, and it just makes for a better essay, really. So always try to include these transition words. I've included a few examples here. For example, here. Next, moreover, furthermore, as a result, however, on the other hand. I'll try to find a list of transition words, and I'll hope to include it in the link in the description of this video. Next, do not get stuck on trivial things like using very hard vocabulary. The main goal of your essay is that you complete it. Okay, I mentioned before and I'm going to mention it again. The GRE essay, length really matters. Like, the bigger your essay is, if it's logical, then a bigger essay will get you more marks. So focus on explaining your body paragraphs and focus on getting to the conclusion. Okay, and then once you're finished, use the remaining time you have left to check your work, edit it, and include difficult vocabulary. For example, I used things like, rife. There is a word there. I used several others which I can't find right now, but I'm going to include this essay in a blog post of mine, and I'm going to include that link in the description very soon, as soon as I create the blog. So right, there was one more thing that I don't think I've mentioned yet. Right, refer back to the instructions. This is very, very important. This is why you need to plan your essay very well, so that you don't stray off topic. Remember that off-topic essays will get you 0 in the GRE. Always go back to the main instructions. Look at what they're trying to do. Do not ramble on and stray off topic. It will cost you. Finally, the difference between a terrible exam and a great exam is that the person who gives a great exam, they give it with a really cool head. Okay? So what you need to do is, practice the prompts in the ETS website, the main ETS website, and just keep practicing until you're confident, okay? So that on exam day, you can write an essay and you're really cool about it, very calm about it. You'll get it. You'll get the hang of it with more practice. So that's it for today. Thank you for listening. I'm going to be uploading more and more videos on discussing planning and writing argument essays and issue essays. So stay tuned and do, come back again soon. Bye bye.